The next three knobs on our compressor are attack, hold, and release. And I know these sound like self-defense terms, but they're not. They're actually timing controls for the compressor itself. Let's talk about how they work. The attack is measured in milliseconds, and it lets you define how quickly the compressor starts to work after the threshold has been exceeded. The same is true of the hold control. It determines how long the compressor holds on to that signal after the threshold has been exceeded. And finally, the release control decides how many milliseconds it's going to add after the threshold has been exceeded on the other end. So once the volume drops below the threshold, the release determines how long the compressor continues to pull the volume back. And then to make it easy, there's also an auto release button. When you turn the auto release on, the release control dims out and the release of the compressor will be determined automatically. So I'm going to turn the auto control off and leave it set at 500 milliseconds. And let's listen to some of the things that you can do with these controls. Go ahead and press play on your Cubase project. If I were to raise the attack control right now, what I'd be doing is I would be allowing some of that initial attack past the threshold to be maintained at the compressor's output. So when I turn the attack up, you can hear that bass drum actually sneaks through a little bit more. It sounds a little bit punchier. So I'm going to bring that attack down. And now the bass drum doesn't sound as punchy because its initial attack is not going through the threshold as much. But if I set it higher again, it's going to sneak through again. I'm going to drop that back down to about 15 milliseconds. The hold control is how long the compressor holds on to that signal past the threshold. And I know it's kind of hard to hear, but essentially it's the grip that the compressor maintains of the signal past the threshold. The release timing of a compressor determines how long after the volume has dropped below the threshold the compressor continues to hold on to that signal. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to start and stop the Cubase project a little bit so that you can actually see how long the compressor is holding onto the signal after the signal drops below the threshold. So I'm going to press play. So if I hit stop, you'll notice that the gain reduction control dropped away pretty fast. However, if I increase the release time and press play, then it takes longer for the compressor to let go of the signal. And then there's also an auto control, and the auto control lets the release timing be controlled by the compressor automatically. So when you click on that, the release knob dims out, and now the compressor is in charge of setting an appropriate release. Now, a lot of times the auto works great, but if you notice that it starts to pump and breathe a little bit, if you really start to hear the amount of compression, it's probably because the release is being determined a little bit incorrectly by the compressor. So therefore, that would be a great time to turn the auto control off and use your ears to determine how much release time there should be on the compressor. Now, the next control over is the analysis knob, and I'll tell you about that next.